All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're very pleased to introduce to you Prof. Dr. Michio Kaku, world-renowned futurist, best-selling author, and popularizer of science, who will be speaking with Puan Surina Shukri, CEO of MDEC, on the 5 big ideas that will shape our future.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everybody. Today, we are super excited to be welcoming Dr. Michio Kaku, who's a world-renowned theoretical physicist, but most of us know him as a futurist. Dr. Kaku is also a world-renowned author, and I know you've authored like 5 books. Most recently, a latest New York Times bestseller, your 5th one, I understand. Congratulations on that. Called the God Equation. So certainly something that would encourage everybody to check out. So our conversation today, this is meant to be an open dialogue. We would like to spend and get your thoughts on a variety of different topics. But before we get into that, maybe if you could tell us a bit more about your love for physics. How did that come about? When was that turning point in your journey? And how did you discover your passion for physics and the future?
Well, it all started when I was 8 years old. Something magical happened which changed my life completely. A great scientist had just died, and all the newspapers published a picture of his desk. That's right, just his desk. On the desk was a book, an empty book. And the caption said, "This is the unfinished manuscript from the greatest scientist of our time." So I thought to myself, wow, what could be so hard that a great scientist could not finish that book? Why didn't he talk to his mother? Why didn't he simply go to the library and look up the answer? Well, I went to the library and I found out this man's name was Albert Einstein. And that book contained the unfinished theory of everything, an equation perhaps no more than 1 inch long that would allow us to, quote, read the mind of God. Well, I was hooked. I had to know everything about this God equation, an equation perhaps no more than 1 inch long that would allow us to unify all the laws of physics into one compact equation. But you know, I was a kid, and on Saturday mornings, I used to watch Flash Gordon on television, and I saw rocket ships, aliens in outer space, cities in the sky, invisibility shields, and I was hooked. I wanted to know everything about the future. But then later in life, I began to realize that the 2 passions of my life, one is theoretical physics, that is completing Einstein's dream, and the other is knowing the future, were really the same thing. You see, if you understand physics, you understand the outlines of the future. When I see predictions by other futurists about one day we'll have teleportation, one day we'll have starships, one day we'll be able to rocket ourselves to the stars, I simply shake my head. And I say, now, wait a minute. Let's apply the laws of physics to some of these predictions. So that's what I do. I try to make predictions about the future of the economy, the future of where we are going with this great industrial revolution. And I say to myself, well, I do a lot of traveling. I travel around the world, and everywhere I go, I see countries that are rich and countries that are poor. And then I ask myself a simple question: why? Why is it that some countries are rising and are vigorous and innovative and new industries are being created, while other countries are stagnant and nothing much happens? And then I begin to wonder that the reason is it's science. Some countries have science and technology, innovation, the spirit of discovery. Other countries drown in taxes, drown in regulations. And so the question is, where does wealth come from? If you talk to a politician, where does wealth come from? They would say that wealth comes from taxes, You tax Peter to pay Paul. But you see, that's a zero-sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses. Society doesn't gain at all. I say no. The origin of wealth in society is science and technology, and we have to nurture it. We have to nurture innovation and discovery. Because after all, if you think about it, the history of science is the history of civilization. You know, the first great revolution was the Industrial Revolution, when we physicists worked out the power of thermodynamics and steam engines. That gave us locomotives, trains, they gave us machinery. The second revolution was when we physicists worked out electricity and magnetism. That gave us generators, television, radio. The third great revolution was when we physicists worked out the quantum theory of lasers and transistors and computers. And now we'll talk about artificial intelligence and the science of the future.
So, Dr. Kaku, you talk, when we think about the future, I like to think of it as, you know, sometimes we're always constantly anticipating what's going to happen in the future, but to some extent, the future is actually already now. And so there's a lot of things that we're doing. There's a lot of technology. Just last week alone, we've got billionaires going up in space. Of course, wearing my Occupy Mars t-shirt here. I know that, you know, we will probably see, my kids will probably see Martians in their lifetime. And so for you, I'd love for you to share with us, like, what are your top predictions for the future? Your favorite three that you're watching right now?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the next 2 to 3 years. Then let's talk about the next 10 to 20 years and even beyond that. First of all, in the next few years, we're going to go back to a new normal. A new normal. In other words, things will be going back to normal to some degree, but things will be changed. First of all, the pandemic. The pandemic accelerated the digitization of society. Society was being digitized anyway, but the pandemic accelerated it. And it accelerated the migrations, for example, to the countryside, to the suburbs. Cities began to depopulate. People began to work on Zoom and online. And some people thought, well, that's the normal evolution of technology. Well, yes and no. That digitization of society, where society goes totally online, goes to the suburbs, the cities collapse, that's temporary. Because you see, there's a conflict between high touch and high tech. High tech goes in one direction, but we are humans. We believe in high touch. And in other words, when Wall Street begins to evacuate their stockbrokers and their financiers, and they go to the suburbs, that's a temporary phenomenon. Eventually, they will come back. Now, why is that? There's something called Dunbar's number. That number is about 100 to 150. That is the number of people that we contact, we are friends with, we're acquaintances of, that we understand. About 100 people. How many people do you send Christmas cards to? For example, maybe 100. How many people are in your Rolodex? How many people do you think about, do you chat with? About 100. Now with animals, like with apes and with primates, the number is about 10 to 20 because their brain is not large enough to keep track of more than 10 other monkeys or 10 other primates. We have a bigger brain, but we feel comfortable in a group of maybe 100 people because in 100 people, you can, quote, read their minds. You have body language. You have the ability to connect with them. You have the ability to read their minds, bond with them. And that's why companies will not go fully online. Many people will go online. Those people that have the ability to work at home, yes, they will go online. They will work from home. But the people at the home office, the people who engage in gossip about work, every day they read each other's body language. Every day they find out, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? That is not going to change. And so in the relationship between high tech and high touch, sometimes high touch wins out. Let's say I do an experiment. I give you a choice. I have 2 tickets where you can see your favorite rock star in a front row seat. Okay, I give you 2 tickets, or I tell you that you can watch your favorite rock star on television. Which would you prefer? Watching your favorite singer on television or having live seats right up front watching your favorite singer? I think most of us would go for high touch over high tech. So there's a limit to how far we're going to go with this new reality created by the pandemic. But also let me say that artificial intelligence will help us to conquer the next pandemic. You realize that 60% of all diseases come from animals. That's right, 60% of all diseases come from animals. Therefore, we're going to have another pandemic. We don't know when. But next time, we're going to be prepared. Sensors will be scattered throughout the environment. Artificial intelligence will scan for any anomalies, anything unusual. For example, thermometers today are already being hooked up to the internet. Instantly, by looking at a picture of America, Europe, instantly you can see where the hotspots are, where fevers are spiking. And then by analyzing Google, you can look for anomalous searches. When people began to say on the internet, I can't breathe, I have a fever, it doesn't go away, I cough, it doesn't stop. Artificial intelligence can detect anomalous web searches on Google. And sports events, we can monitor them by drones. Drones can take pictures of soccer games by the hundreds of thousands and see who has a temperature by looking at an infrared scan of their face. And so what I'm trying to say is something simple. The next time around, we will be prepared because artificial intelligence will give us the tools to look for anything anomalous. You realize that if you go to Helsinki Airport today, a dog can see whether or not you have the virus in 10 seconds. In 10 seconds with 96% accuracy, a dog can sniff and tell you whether you have the virus or not. In the future, we'll replace the dog with artificial intelligence. So you won't have to have a lengthy test. Within seconds, we will know with 96% confidence who has a virus and who doesn't. So in the next few years, artificial intelligence is going to make sure that we have an early warning system to protect us against the next virus.
So, Dr. Kaku, would you say that so 2 questions related to the pandemic. So number 1, would you say that the pandemic has accelerated some of these developments in artificial intelligence? And then 2, were there anything that has made you change your mind? Was there a position that you had or thought that you had before the pandemic, and then now thereafter, the theory, your hypothesis changed a little bit? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
My thinking has accelerated because the virus has accelerated the process toward digitization. In all my books, I say it's inevitable that we are seeing the birth of a digitized society, where we simply blink and the internet is in your contact lens. In other words, you blink and there you are online immediately. And when you meet somebody, you blink and you will have a biography of the person right there in your contact lens as you meet somebody for dinner, somebody at a party. You will always know who you're talking to, what you are looking at. And if they speak to you in Greek or Armenian or Chinese, your contact lens will translate that into whatever language you want. So in other words, at a cocktail party, you will always know who you're talking to, what you are looking at, what language are people speaking, and have it translated right there in your contact lens. That's a digitized society, a society where information is there for you simply by blinking. And I think that's where we're headed. But as I mentioned, there are limits to this. And the limits are because we descended from hunters. 100,000, 200,000 years ago, we lived in small bands of maybe 100, 200 people, and we hunted in small groups. You had to trust your life to the hunter next to you. Your life depended on whether or not you can trust the people around you. And therefore, we developed a very high sense of body language, bonding. Your life depended upon whether or not you could trust the hunter next to you. That has not changed at all. In the digital world, if you're the CEO of a company, you want to use body language to find out who can you trust, who's lying to you, who's faking the numbers, who's really outstanding, who's doing the work, and who's lazy. You can't do that online. On Zoom, you can't tell who the lazy ones are, who the bright ones are. No, you have to see them up close. And so there are limits. There are limits to what the digitization of society can offer, because we are descended from hunters of maybe 100 people or so. I learned this when I was in the Army. During the Vietnam War, I was in the United States Infantry, and my platoon had about 100 people. And I realized that my life depended on knowing who can I trust, who is dependable, who is not dependable, who simply talks a lot but does nothing, who's lazy, who can I trust my life with. And the same thing at headquarters. That's why Wall Street is now saying to many of its employees, come back, or else there's no job to come back to. So I think the digitization of society was accelerated by the pandemic up to a point. And up to the point is when we start to realize the fact that we are descended from hunters and we love high touch versus high tech.
So would you say that the more, it sounds to me, the more digital we become, the more human we must become. And so all these other facets become really, really important as well. And so the more we think that we need technology, it's all these other facets of togetherness, society and whatnot, it becomes really, really important, it sounds like.
That's right. We have to take into account that there are two factors involved with what I'm talking about. One is the digitization factor. That's inevitable. We have Moore's law, which says the computer power doubles every 18 months. Every 18 months, almost by clockwork, computer power doubles. However, it is slowing down now, but that's the digitization of society. Then, of course, we have the fact that we're humans. We're human beings. We size each other up. Body language. Body language is older than language itself. Think about that. When we descended from the apes, body language was the only way to communicate. That's why grooming is very important for monkeys to bond with other monkeys. And we have to realize that body language is older than language itself. And so the digitization of society has to be done in conjunction with the fact that we are human beings. So if you think about it, the internet is great. But at night, what do? At night, we throw caution to the winds and we start to act crazy. That's Facebook. So Facebook, in some sense, is like the campfire late at night. Late at night, after a hard day's work hunting for the tigers and the mammoths and the deer, we would go back to the campfire and goof off, sing crazy songs, do all sorts of crazy things. Well, that's Facebook. But watch out, because the craziness that you put on the web lasts forever. It never is erased at all. And so what I'm trying to say is something very simple. You have to balance two things when you analyze the future. You have to analyze human behavior, our wants, our desires, our body language, how we bond with other people, and we have to look at the digitization of society.
Society. So, Dr. Kaku, I'm curious to get your thoughts. We talked about AI. We talked about other technologies. But what else do you think would be some of the biggest trends that's going to come, that's going to impact humanity?
I think we have to look at the nature of capitalism itself. Now, no one is saying that we're going to replace capitalism, but capitalism itself is mutating to a higher level on two respects. First of all, we're headed towards something that I call perfect capitalism. First of all, what is capitalism? Capitalism is basically the fact that we have private ownership of the means of production, and prices are set by supply and demand. That's it. Private ownership with supply and demand. That's called capitalism. But you see, capitalism is not perfect. You don't know what things really cost. You don't know who's cheating you. You don't know what products are guaranteed, what products are going to fall apart. You don't know who makes the best product at all. It's guesswork to a large degree. But you see, in the future, when you go to a store, your contact lens will scan everything and tell you who has the best bargain, what products are the best, what are people talking about in terms of products that you really want. So in other words, information will be everywhere and nowhere just by blinking. This means that capitalism is going to become, quote, more perfect, because you will know without uncertainty anymore what prices really cost. This also means the middlemen are going to be under pressure, because if a middleman simply makes products move in the assembly line, if that's all they do, then they're going to be out of a job. Middlemen have to change or they will be out of business. For example, look at Jeff Bezos. Why is Jeff Bezos of Amazon the richest man in the world? One phrase: he digitized the middleman. That's all he did. Something so simple. And yet that idea was worth hundreds of billions of dollars. He digitized the middleman. So if you are a middleman, watch out. What do you do if you are a middleman?
So in your example that you just shared.
Yes?
So in that example that you just shared, where the contact lens, so we hear aspects of AI, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and so these are going to be, central themes in the next wave of wealth creation. And so with that, now we're already seeing this digitization of the middlemen. And so when you think about what's next, how can businesses do today to remain relevant in the next 5 to 10 years?
We are now in the fourth wave of innovation and wealth creation. The first wave, as I mentioned, was the Industrial Revolution, powered by the steam engine. All of a sudden, we had machines that could mass produce goods and services. The second revolution was the Electric Revolution, where dynamos and radios and televisions and microwaves changed the way we live. The third revolution was the quantum revolution of computers, lasers, semiconductors, the internet, all byproducts of the quantum theory. But there's a fourth wave and a fifth wave waiting for us. So what is the fourth wave? The fourth wave is science at the molecular level, meaning artificial intelligence, meaning biotechnology and nanotechnology. Why is it that we know so much about the coronavirus? We know its family tree. We know its history. We know how it spreads. We know how it mutates because of the revolution of biotechnology, which will one day give us mastery of the human body itself. But there's a fifth wave also coming. Let me mention that. We won't hit the fifth wave till probably mid-century. The fifth wave includes physics at the atomic level. That includes, for example, fusion power, which will one day hopefully give us a cure for global warming, fusion power. And then BrainNet. We will communicate with the internet mentally. You will think, and your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings will be sent on the internet. And that's going to revolutionize television, radio. It's going to revolutionize the movies. Who wants to see movies anymore when there's no emotions? There's no feeling. But that's what this next wave is going to give us. And then lastly, quantum computers. Quantum computers are going to replace silicon, giving us a new revolution in computation.
So, Dr. Kaku, we've seen that, you know, we talk about all these next big thing, and I'm sure, you know, because the only thing constant is change. We're going to see a lot of different things. But what do you think is the next small thing that we're going to see in the short term that you think will impact our lives significantly?
Well, we talked about the next few years. We talked about the next 10, 20 years. Now let's talk about now. That is, what small things can governments and society do now to change the way everything works? First of all, I think governments have to realize that taxation is not the way to create wealth. Taxation is the way to manage wealth, but it's not the way to create wealth. So instead of taxing young corporations, you should encourage young corporations, encourage innovation, lower taxes, give government grants to small companies. By lowering taxes, you free up money whereby entrepreneurs, innovators can create new industries. So that's the first easy thing that governments can do now. Lower taxes, start to fund industries which are young, growing, innovative, and realize that tax money should be freed up so that society can innovate. Second, education. In other words, why is it that Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley? In part because A, Stanford University was right there, a pool of high-tech entrepreneurs right there in that area. And I grew up in Palo Alto. I saw the whole thing happen. Land was cheap. Taxes were low. It was easy to create Hewlett-Packard, Varian Associates. It was easy. And who created these things? Teenagers. Teenagers created these things. Hewlett-Packard was created by two teenagers knocking on garage doors, asking for people to invest in two teenagers who wanted to create Hewlett-Packard. Well, those people who opened the door and invested with these two teenagers became multi-millionaires. So there's a lesson here, and that is we have to educate the young, give them grants, make sure that you nurture their curiosity, raise them to the level where they are fluent in the high technology of the future, lower the taxes on their startup companies so they can innovate, and hire people to create entire industries. And so some people say, no, we can't do that, because every time you hire a worker, it takes jobs away from our people. Realize that high-tech people are job creators. They're not just job destroyers. They create industries that can hire thousands of individuals. So you have to invest in science and the people who push science, and these are the young people, the people that are educated, energetic, innovative, bursting with ideas, bursting with energies. These are the people who are going to change the future. And so governments have to change the way they look at these young corporations. Governments look at these young corporations as saying, we can tax these people. That's what we're going to do. We're going to tax them to death. Well, yeah, you tax them to death and poof, there goes your economy. In other words, don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. The goose that laid the golden egg are the young innovators bursting with ideas, energy. We have to lower taxes on them. We have to give them government grants. We have to educate them by sponsoring universities. And centers of great learning are also centers of great wealth. Why is it that Silicon Valley is so rich? It's no accident that that's where Stanford University is. I grew up there. I grew up in Palo Alto. I saw it happen. Palo Alto used to be a place with apple orchards, poor people, migrant workers. That's the world that I grew up with. Now it's all glass, steel, bursting with energy, bursting with innovation. And developing countries can learn a lesson.
One of the trends that we've seen is the spread of innovation across the world. And so when you think about that, what are some other things that we can encourage? How do we encourage more conservative societies to actually be more innovative and experiment more? Because that's exactly what you've described. We need to encourage innovation. And so Asia, for example, is quite conservative. And so how would we encourage more innovation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
We talked about what governments can do, but let's talk about society now. Society has to encourage more freedom of speech and dialogue and ideas. Now, some people may not like that because, of course, some of these ideas may be unappealing to society in general. But realize that that's where good ideas come from. It comes from the free-floating interaction of ideas, because out of these ideas come products, companies, new ideas that can spring entire industries. And so we have to realize that there's a good and a bad. We have to allow more freedom of speech. We have to allow more freedom of discovery, more freedom to question things. Some people feel uncomfortable about that, but there's a price to pay. There's a price to pay that we have to tolerate more discussion about the internet. Now, the internet is very controversial because, of course, sometimes nonsense gets on the internet. But realize that that's where truth comes from. Truth does not emerge from a vacuum. Truth comes from interaction with untruth, with crazy ideas. Society has to get used to the fact that, yes, the internet is noisy, but out of the noise comes industries, new talent, new ideas that can challenge the old ideas of the past. And so we have to realize that, yes, there's a price to pay. The price to pay is we're going to have to tolerate some ideas that sound crazy at first, but allow free interaction of ideas so that we can create products. We can create industries that will hire people, that will then generate taxes, and then the politicians can start to tax these things. You know, when you look at where wealth comes from, if you talk to a lawyer, where does wealth come from? A lawyer may say it's lawsuits. You sue Peter to pay Paul. But that's a zero-sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses. You talk to an economist, where does wealth come from? And the economist would say, print money. Print money. You want money? Go to the printing press and print money. But you see, that robs the future to pay for the present. I say, and this is the theme of my talk today, the origin of wealth is science and technology. But to harness science and technology, we have to encourage a spirit of innovation, a spirit of reaching out, creating new industries. We have to foster that spirit, that energy that comes with that. For example, as I mentioned, why is Jeff Bezos the richest man in the world? He digitized the middleman. Well, why is Bill Gates and Elon Musk the next richest men in the world? They fostered new industries with a spirit of competition. They're not necessarily geniuses, but they saw that this was where wealth is going to be created in the future. So that's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Where does wealth come from? It doesn't come from taxes. Taxes can speed it up. It can facilitate it, but it's not the origin of wealth at all. Ultimately, wealth comes from science and technology created by the innovators.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you've encapsulated that very well. It's this ability to create new industries, create that something out of nothing, and that's how you generate wealth. In the last few moments that we have, you've given advice to, you touched on what governments can do, what societies can do. I'm curious to get your thought. I have to ask this question when we think about the kids, the children that we have, because we always talk about, the future is going to be different. And so today, what advice do you give to parents, for example, in encouraging, in preparing the next generation of youth for this new future that we don't really know what it's going to be like?
When I was a child growing up in elementary school, we were told that there was something called the sick man of Asia, that Asia was bursting with too many people. And as a consequence, Asia would always be poor, too many mouths to feed. Now we realize that it flipped the other way. Now we realize that because Asia has a large population, every worker is a source of wealth. It's a source of industry, the source of talent. And this is, again, wealth creation. And so we have this irony that the so-called sick men of Asia, that is too many people, have now flipped the other way. We now realize that the leaders of the future are precisely those countries which see their population as a source of wealth, not as a negative, but as a positive, because people generate jobs, industries, talents, economic activity. It's not just a drain on society. So when you talk to young people, you have to tell them, of course, they are the future. But you can always say that. The future of what? The future is in science and technology. Of course, we have to learn the other disciplines as well, art and society, so on and so forth. But the driver of wealth of the future will be science and technology. And those nations which grasp that, which can encourage young people to learn and be fluent in this technology, they will be rich in the future. So look at the cities, look at the countries where we have new industries booming out of nothing. Just think about it. Where does the wealth of information technology come from? It comes from the air. It comes from nothing. Out of nothing, pure nothing, you can create entire industries because it's all a byproduct of the mind. And that's where wealth comes from. Ultimately, it comes from here. And we have to teach young people that fact. And so, yes, young people get distracted. Yes, young people want to do goofy things. Yes, children will be children. But when it comes to jobs, we have to tell people that science and technology are job creators, not job destroyers, but job creators. Now, there's a price you have to pay. Some people say, well, science and technology is hard. Well, yeah, because the way we teach science and technology is all memorization. That's not science. Let me tell you a story. Richard Feynman was a Nobel Prize winner in physics. When he was a child, his father would teach him everything about birds, the shape of their wings, the color, how they flew, how they evolved, everything about the form and the physics of birds. Well, one day, a bully comes up to the young Feynman and says, hey, Dick, what's the name of that bird over there? And the young Nobel Prize winner said, I don't know the name of that bird. In fact, Feynman knew everything about that bird, its color, its wings, its beak, its feeding, except its name. And then the bully said, what's the matter, Dick? You stupid or something? And instantly, the future Nobel Prize winner understood the difference between the appearance of science and science itself. Science is not giving names to birds. That's how we teach science. That's why science is boring. It's tedious, learning the names of things that you're going to forget the next day anyway. No, science is about concepts, principles, themes like evolution, like relativity. That's what science is really all about. So when we teach science, we cannot just teach memorization of useless facts and figures that you're going to forget anyway. No, we have to teach that science is about life. It's about principles, concepts. It's about things that change our understanding of the universe. Then science becomes exciting rather than boring.
I couldn't agree with you more. So with that, so we covered a lot of different topics this morning, and from capitalism to science, but ultimately it comes down to this whole spirit of embracing information, embracing knowledge, and also embracing humanity at the end of the day. And so with that, I thank you very, very much, Dr. Kaku. I took a lot from this. I took a lot of notes as well. And so thank you so much for your time, for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Professor and Puan Surina, for that thought-provoking session that really opened up the eyes to new ideas and new ways of thinking. I absolutely agree with Professor that science shouldn't be taught through memorization or rote learning. It should be made fun and exciting, because I believe through science, it can answer a lot of the world's problems. It can be, the solution to many of the world's problems that we may have not seen just yet. So let us all look forward towards the year ahead with a more buoyant resolve and much more proactive mindset. We're off to a great start. I would like to invite all of you to join us for our next session, which will begin shortly, Building a Digital Nation, our story. In the meantime, please feel free to fill up the survey so that we can hear your thoughts and continuously serve you better. See you soon.